Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Wednesday Wisdom. My name is JB Hilliard, and these are weekly video snippets of information designed to answer questions you may have about estate planning or probate or whatever other legal concerns may be swirling around in your head. And for this week's Wednesday Wisdom, we are continuing from last week's introduction to a hypothetical situation regarding three owners of property. So if you haven't already watched last week's video, please go ahead and scroll down or go to my YouTube library and check that out real quick. So for this week, we have to determine, or the cliffhanger question from last week was, who gets the property? Now there are a few other things we need to look at. So let's kind of recap what this hypothetical scenario looks like. So you have Hank and Wilma as a married couple joining with a cousin, Conley, to buy this piece of property, this home. And they are co-owners, but not joint owners. And if you don't understand or recognize the difference that I'm trying to insinuate there, that's another Wednesday Wisdom that I've already done or one that I will do. But at any rate, they each have a third interest ownership in this property. So if you look at the chart, where we left off was trying to figure out who would get this property and identifying right now the next of kin, since all three of these owners died without leaving a will in place. And so Hank and Wilma, although they were married and they had a son, Hank Jr., Wilma also had a daughter from a previous marriage, Wilhelmina, as you see on this chart. And then Conley did not have any spouse or children. And so we briefly talked about the different levels of determining his next of kin or his next heir, since he also did not leave a will at his passing. And so when you look at this, initially you may think that Hank's share goes to Hank Jr. His third share of this property would go to Hank Jr. And Wilma's share would go to Wilhelmina and Hank Jr. And then Conley's share would go to his next of kin. And let's just go ahead and give you an additional tidbit of information in this hypo, where let's say Conley's next of kin is an Aunt Carrie. So with that said, this is what I'm presuming you would come up with. But let me throw in another kicker for you. And as our law school hypos would typically do to us, I'm going to do to you. So there's another bit of information that I need to add to help you work through this problem. When we're talking about intestate property or probate of an intestate estate, that means an estate decedent, the person that passed away without having a will, we determine the level of heirs that would get this property, get ownership of that particular decedent's property. With a married couple, now we have to determine between Hank and Wilma who died first, because their property is shared with their surviving spouse and their children, not just the children. And so let's presume for these purposes that Hank passed away first. Then his third interest, I know we didn't mean to make this a math problem, but it is. His third interest in this property goes to Hank Jr. and Wilma, his surviving wife, because she was alive at the time of his passing. So half goes to Hank Jr., half goes to Wilma. Now, fast forward a few years, Wilma is the next to pass away. Then that share that she got from Hank, as well as her third share, is now split between her next of kin. So she doesn't have a spouse that survived her. So all of hers, what she has an interest in, her ownership interest, now goes to her surviving children, Hank Jr. and Wilhelmina. And then Conley's goes to Aunt Carrie. What do those numbers look like? Well, my time is up, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to let you work on that over the course of the next few days or until our next Wednesday Wisdom. And why don't I just do a part 3 and let's look at how messy this really is going to look. Until then, as always, I thank you for watching and we'll see you next time.